It began on a cold morning that didn't quite feel like any other. The city was wrapped in a dull, gray mist, the kind that makes everything seem half awake, half forgotten. The sound of traffic was distant, muffled by the fog, as if the world itself had paused for a breath. Inside a small apartment on the 5th floor of an old brick building, a man named Alex sat by the window, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. His reflection stared back, tired eyes, unshaven face, and a look that carried the weight of unspoken defeat. He was 37 years old, but his gaze seemed decades older. He had once been full of ideas, the kind that made people believe he was destined for something great. Yet here he was, staring at nothing, feeling everything. Bills scattered across the table, a resignation letter he hadn't yet sent, and a phone buzzing with unanswered calls from a world that had moved on without him. Somewhere deep down, Alex knew that he had lost something far greater than money or opportunity. He had lost himself. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the first weak light of dawn. Alex's mind drifted back to a time when mornings were filled with purpose. He remembered his early 20s, the dreams, the hunger, the long nights spent sketching plans, reading books, and promising himself he would make it. But somewhere along the way, life had quietly stolen that fire. He didn't notice when it happened. Perhaps it was the small compromises, the routines, the disappointments he buried under the illusion of being fine. That morning, for reasons he couldn't explain, Alex reached for an old notebook on his shelf. It was worn, the edges frayed, its pages filled with his younger self's handwriting, goals, quotes, ideas, and bold declarations. On one of the first pages, a name caught his eye: Jim Rohn. Next to it, written in uneven letters, were the words, "Work harder on yourself than you do on your job." He read it again. The words felt different now, heavier, deeper. They struck something within him, something that had been asleep for far too long. He closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, letting those words echo in his mind. Work on yourself. Simple. Direct. Yet it felt like a challenge he was no longer sure he could meet. Later that day, he found himself walking without a destination. The city was alive now, people rushing, horns blaring, screens glowing. But Alex walked as if detached from all of it, lost in thought. He passed a park where children were laughing, and for a moment, he envied their unshaken joy. He sat on a bench, trying to remember the last time he had truly felt alive. It was there that an old man approached, dressed neatly, carrying a small bag of birdseed. His face was wrinkled, but his eyes carried a lightness, an unbothered calm that Alex hadn't seen in years. The man smiled politely, asked if he could sit, and began scattering crumbs to the pigeons. They sat in silence for a while before the old man spoke. "You look like someone searching for something," he said, his tone gentle, almost amused. Alex gave a tired smile. "Maybe I am. Or maybe I've already lost it." The man chuckled softly. "Losing yourself happens quietly. Finding yourself takes noise, effort, change, reflection. I used to think success was about having more, doing more. But it's not. It's about becoming more." Alex turned to him, curious. "Becoming more?" "Yes," the man nodded. "Jim Rohn said that. Most people spend their whole lives working on things, jobs, relationships, dreams, but forget to work on themselves. And then they wonder why everything around them feels broken." The name hit Alex again like a bell in his mind. "Jim Rohn," he murmured, almost to himself. The man smiled knowingly. "Ah, so you've heard of him." They talked for nearly an hour. The old man told him stories about failure, resilience, discipline, and the quiet work of personal growth. He spoke with the kind of wisdom that comes from living, not reading. Before leaving, he handed Alex a small piece of paper. "Start here," he said. "When the student is ready, the teacher appears." Alex unfolded the note after the man left. It contained 3 words: discipline, reflection, purpose. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. The words kept turning over in his mind. He opened his laptop, typed Jim Rohn motivation, and clicked the first video he saw. The voice that filled his small apartment was calm, commanding, and timeless. It spoke of responsibility, of transformation, of changing from the inside out. "Don't wish it were easier," the voice said. "Wish you were better." Alex felt something shift. He realized that his life hadn't stopped, he had. The opportunities hadn't vanished, his awareness had. He had been waiting for circumstances to change, never realizing that it was he who needed to change first. The next morning, he woke early, earlier than usual. He cleaned his apartment, brewed fresh coffee, and wrote on a blank page, "Day 1 becoming more." Below it, he listed small tasks, things he could control. Read for 1 hour. Exercise. Journal. Reflect. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Days turned into weeks. The fog outside his window began to feel less like a metaphor for his life. He found himself speaking differently, thinking differently, feeling differently. He noticed patterns, how often he complained, how quickly he gave up, how little he appreciated the simple things. And with each realization came a decision to be better, even in small ways. Yet the road of self-work is not straight. One evening, after a long day, Alex returned home to find a letter slipped under his door. It was from his company, Final Notice. The project he had once led was now dissolved. It felt like another failure, another ending. But this time, something within him didn't break. Instead, he smiled faintly. "All right," he whispered to himself. "Let's see what this really means." He sat down, opened his notebook again, and beneath the words "Day 1, becoming more," he wrote, "Life is not what happens to you. It's what you become because of it." As he closed the notebook, his eyes wandered to the city lights outside, distant, flickering, but alive. Somewhere in that glowing maze, opportunity waited. Not in the world, but within him. He didn't yet know where the path would lead. But he knew this. The work had begun. Like this video and subscribe to my channel for more inspiring stories like this. That night, as Alex lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the city faded into the background. A question lingered in his mind. Who was that old man, and how did he know what Alex needed to hear at that very moment? And more importantly, what would he find if he truly began to work on himself? The next morning brought an unexpected message that would change everything. The message arrived just as dawn broke. Alex's phone buzzed quietly on the bedside table, the screen lighting up the dim room. He reached for it, expecting another meaningless notification or a spam email. But when he opened it, he froze. The sender's name was unfamiliar. The Growth Circle. The message read simply, "You are invited." Below it, a link. He hesitated. His instinct told him to ignore it. He didn't remember signing up for anything like that. But something about the timing, so soon after his encounter with the old man, stirred a strange curiosity. He clicked the link. A plain page opened, black background, white letters, private gathering, personal growth workshop, limited participants. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Address to follow upon confirmation. At the bottom, there was a quote. "Your life doesn't get better by chance, it gets better by change." Jim Rohn. He stared at it for a long moment. Was this a coincidence? Or something more? Finally, without fully understanding why, he clicked confirm attendance. The next day felt unusually long. Every hour dragged with anticipation and doubt. By evening, as the sun melted behind the city skyline, Alex found himself standing outside an old building near the river. There was no signboard, no name, only a single golden light glowing from a window on the second floor. He climbed the narrow staircase, the wooden steps creaking beneath his shoes. When he reached the door, he paused. A small plaque beside it read, "The Growth Circle. Welcome to Transformation." He took a breath and pushed it open. Inside, a group of about a dozen people sat in a quiet semicircle. Men and women of different ages, all wearing the same expression he had worn just weeks ago. Lost, curious, hungry for something they couldn't name. At the center stood a man in his late 50s, dressed simply, but with an unmistakable presence. He looked up and smiled warmly when he saw Alex. "Welcome," he said. "We were expecting you." The voice struck him immediately, calm, powerful, familiar in some way. The man gestured for him to take a seat. "My name is Samuel," he said, "and you are here because you've begun to ask the right questions." The room was silent except for the low hum of the city outside. Samuel walked slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Most people want to change their lives," he began, "but they never realize the first change must happen inside. They chase success, comfort, recognition, but none of those things last without a stronger self to hold them." His eyes moved around the circle, resting briefly on Alex. "Working on yourself is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of responsibility. You cannot pour from an empty cup." As he spoke, Alex felt as if the words were meant only for him. Each phrase landed deep, stirring something raw. He thought of the years he had spent waiting for luck, waiting for validation, waiting for life to make sense. And now, sitting there, he realized he had been the missing piece all along. Samuel continued, "Tonight, we begin with awareness. Who you are now is not who you must remain. But before you can grow, you must see clearly what has held you still." They were each given a notebook and asked to write without stopping for 10 minutes, not about their goals, but about their fears. What they feared losing, what they feared becoming. The exercise was harder than Alex expected. His pen hovered over the paper for a long time before he finally began to write. Words poured out: fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of being ordinary. When he looked up, his hands were trembling. Samuel collected the notebooks and smiled gently. "These fears," he said, "are not your enemies. They are your teachers. Growth begins when you stop running from them." After the session ended, most people lingered, talking quietly. Alex, however, walked to the window. The river shimmered below, reflecting the city's restless lights. Samuel joined him. "You're not here by accident," he said softly. "Something in you called out for change, and life responded." Alex turned to him. "Did you send the message?" Samuel's lips curved into a mysterious smile. "The message finds who it's meant to find." Then he added, "Come back tomorrow. We're just getting started." That night, Alex walked home under the pale moonlight, his mind spinning. He felt alive again, uncertain, but alive. It was as if he had stepped into a world where meaning waited behind every word. The following evening, he returned. The room was dimly lit with candles, the air filled with quiet focus. This time, Samuel spoke about discipline, the bridge between desire and achievement. "Motivation fades," he said, "but discipline, that's the muscle of the soul." They were each given an assignment. For 7 days, commit to one promise made to oneself. No excuses, no delays. Something simple, but consistent. Alex chose to wake up at 5 a.m. every morning and spend the first hour reading and writing reflections. The first 2 days were easy, fueled by excitement. But by the third day, fatigue crept in. The temptation to stay in bed whispered louder each morning. Yet every time he wanted to give up, he remembered Samuel's words: "Discipline is remembering what you want." By the 7th day, something had shifted. He began to crave that early hour of stillness. The city slept, but his mind was awake, clear. He filled pages with thoughts, realizations, and quotes that once felt like cliches, but now glowed with truth. When he returned to the workshop that weekend, Samuel asked each participant to share what they'd learned. Some spoke of frustration, others of small victories. When it was Alex's turn, he hesitated before saying, "I realized that I've been waiting for the world to change before changing myself. But every morning I woke up early, I felt like I was meeting the person I was supposed to be." Samuel nodded, pleased. "Good," he said, "because the hardest battle is not against time, or others, or circumstances. It's against the part of you that resists growth." After the session, Samuel handed him an envelope. "For you," he said. "Open it when you're ready." That night, at home, Alex sat at his desk and carefully tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "Growth requires isolation. Take 3 days. Go somewhere quiet. No phone, no internet, no distractions. Listen to yourself." He stared at it for a long moment. It felt extreme. yet something about it pulled at him. He thought of the noise that had filled his life. Messages, screens, the constant rush. Maybe silence was what he needed most. The next morning, he packed a small bag, filled a notebook, and left for a small cabin outside the city, a place he had once visited years ago with friends. The road was empty, the air crisp. When he arrived, he turned off his phone and placed it in a drawer. The silence that followed felt both terrifying and liberating. That first night, the quiet pressed against him like a weight. Memories surfaced, some sharp, some tender. He wrote for hours, letting every thought spill unfiltered. The second day, his mind began to settle. The noise within started to fade. He noticed the sound of the wind, the rhythm of his breath, the pulse of being alive. On the third night, as he sat by the window watching the stars, he suddenly thought of Samuel and the old man in the park. Could they be connected? The timing, the message, the words, all too precise to be coincidence. He felt as if invisible hands were guiding him towards something larger, something he couldn't yet name. A sudden knock on the cabin door broke the silence. Alex froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. The sound came again, firm, deliberate. His heart raced as he rose and moved toward the door, every step echoing in the stillness. When he opened it, the cold night air swept in. Standing there, half-lit by the moon, was someone he did not expect to see. It was the old man from the park. He stood there exactly as Alex remembered, calm eyes, faint smile, that same quiet strength in his presence. For a moment, Alex couldn't find his voice. The man didn't speak either. He simply looked at him, as though confirming something unspoken. Finally, Alex stepped aside and said softly, "You found me." The old man nodded, entering the cabin with slow, deliberate steps. "I told you," he said, "when the student is ready, the teacher appears." He placed his coat on the back of a chair and glanced around. "You've done well coming here. Silence reveals what noise hides." Alex's confusion grew. "Who are you really? Are you part of this growth circle?" The old man smiled faintly. "Names and titles are not important. What matters is that you're beginning to see." He gestured toward the small fire burning in the hearth. "Sit. We have work to do." Alex obeyed, his curiosity outweighing his unease. The man sat across from him, eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "Tell me," he said, "what have you learned so far?" Alex hesitated, searching for words. "I've learned that I was asleep. That most of my life, I waited for things to happen to me. And now I'm beginning to understand that nothing changes until I do." The old man nodded slowly. "Good. But understanding is only the beginning. Awareness without action is like seeing a door and never walking through it. Tell me, what are you afraid of now?" Alex looked into the fire. The flames twisted and cracked like thoughts refusing to be still. "I'm afraid that I'll fall back again," he admitted. "That this new version of me won't last. That I'll lose momentum, go back to old habits, to comfort." The old man's expression softened. "That fear is not your enemy. It is a compass pointing toward your next lesson. Every time you feel it, move toward it. The comfort zone is the graveyard of growth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "Here," he said, handing it to Alex. Inside was a simple wooden key. "This is not for a door," he explained. "It is a reminder. You already hold the key. Never forget that." Alex turned the key in his hand. It was smooth, warm from the man's touch, strangely grounding. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked quietly. "Keep walking," the man replied. "Keep growing. But this time not alone." He stood, placing a hand on Alex's shoulder. "Tomorrow at dawn, walk east through the woods. You'll find a path you haven't noticed before. Follow it. There, you'll find what you're meant to face next." Before Alex could ask another question, the old man moved toward the door. "Wait," Alex called out. "Will I see you again?" The man turned back, the faintest smile at the corner of his lips. "You already are." Then he stepped outside, disappearing into the darkness as quietly as he had come. Alex stayed awake long after he left, staring at the wooden key in his palm. Part of him wondered if it had really happened or if the isolation was playing tricks on his mind. But the smell of the man's coat still lingered in the room, and the chair where he'd sat remained slightly warm. When the first light of dawn spilled through the window, Alex put on his jacket, pocketed the key, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp soil. He turned east, just as the old man had said, and began walking. At first, he saw nothing unusual, only the same trees and winding trail. But after nearly 20 minutes, he noticed a narrow path breaking away from the main one, half hidden by overgrown ferns. It hadn't been there before, or maybe he'd simply never looked closely enough. He hesitated only a moment before stepping onto it. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. The wind, the birds, even the distant hum of the city faded until only the sound of his footsteps remained. The path curved gently upward until it opened into a small clearing. At the center stood a wooden cabin, smaller than his own, but freshly built, with smoke curling from its chimney. A man stood outside chopping wood. When he saw Alex, he stopped, leaned on his axe, and smiled. "You made it," he said. Alex blinked. "You were expecting me?" "Samuel told me you might come," the man replied. "Said you were ready for the next step." His name was Daniel, a former student of Samuel's who had turned this place into a retreat for those willing to dig deeper. Inside the cabin, the walls were lined with books, journals, and old photographs. The smell of cedar and coffee filled the air. Daniel poured 2 cups and sat across from Alex. "Samuel teaches the foundation," he said. "But real transformation begins when the foundation is tested. You've learned discipline, awareness, and silence. Now it's time for the hardest part, confrontation." "Confrontation with what?" Alex asked. "With yourself," Daniel said simply. "Everything you've avoided. Everything you've blamed on others. The truth about who you are." Over the next days, Daniel guided him through a series of exercises, not physical, but mental and emotional. He asked Alex to revisit his past, not to dwell, but to observe. To write down the moments he had hidden from, the choices he regretted, the people he had hurt or resented. Each evening, Alex would read them aloud to the empty forest, releasing them into the night air. It was painful, sometimes unbearable. There were nights when he shouted, cried, even laughed bitterly at his own illusions. One evening, after hours of writing, Alex sat by the fire outside the cabin. Daniel joined him in silence. After a long while, Daniel said, "You've carried guilt for too long." Alex looked up, startled. "Guilt?" "Yes," Daniel said softly. "Not just for what you did, but for what you didn't do. For the dreams you abandoned, for the times you chose fear over courage. Guilt keeps you tied to who you were, not who you can be." Alex lowered his gaze to the flames. "How do I let it go?" "By forgiving the man you used to be," Daniel said. "He did the best he could with what he knew. You're not him anymore." That night, Alex wrote a letter, not to anyone else, but to himself. He apologized, forgave, and promised to start anew. When he finished, he folded the letter, placed it in the fire, and watched it burn to ash. For the first time in years, his chest felt light. The following morning, Daniel handed him a small sealed envelope. "This came for you," he said. Alex frowned. "How?" "Samuel has his ways," Daniel replied with a knowing smile. Alex opened it carefully. Inside was a single line in Samuel's handwriting. "When you're ready to lead others, return to where you began." Beneath it, a small drawing of a circle, the same emblem from the growth circle meetings. Alex stared at it, realization dawning slowly. "He wants me to go back," he whispered. Daniel nodded. "Growth is not meant to stay hidden in the woods. It must return to the world." As Alex packed his bag to leave, Daniel placed something in his hand, a second wooden key, identical to the first. "2 keys," Daniel said. "One to open yourself, the other to open others." Alex left the cabin at dawn. The path behind him seemed shorter, the forest less intimidating. When he reached his car, he turned back for one last look. The cabin was gone. Only the clearing remained, silent and untouched, as if it had never existed at all. He drove back toward the city, the sun rising behind him, both keys resting in his palm. He didn't know exactly what awaited him, only that the next chapter was calling. When he returned home that evening, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message came not from the growth circle, but from an unknown number. It read, "Welcome back, Alex. Tomorrow, 9 p.m. The others are waiting." The next evening, as the city lights shimmered against the river, Alex stood outside the same building where it had all begun, the place where he first met Samuel, where he had taken his first step toward rediscovering himself. But this time, the air felt different. He was no longer walking in with uncertainty. He was walking in with purpose. The fog of doubt that once clouded his mind was gone. Every breath he took now carried intention, clarity, and quiet power. When he entered the room, he expected to see the same familiar faces sitting in a circle, waiting to learn. But instead, the room was filled with new people, young, old, men and women who all wore that same lost expression he had once carried. At the center, the chair where Samuel used to stand was empty. On the wall behind it, written in bold white letters, were the words, "Work on yourself and the world will follow." A young woman stepped forward and greeted him warmly. "You must be Alex," she said. "Samuel told us you'd be here. He said when the time came, you would know what to do." Alex felt a mix of disbelief and awe. "He's not here?" She shook her head gently. "He hasn't been here for weeks. He said his work with us was done." For a moment, Alex stood silent, his thoughts spinning. And then it struck him. Samuel hadn't left him behind. He had passed the torch. Every word, every lesson, every test had been leading to this moment. Slowly, he walked toward the center of the circle, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room upon him. He turned to face them, his voice calm but strong. "You came here because something inside you is restless. Because no matter how much you've achieved, or how far you've fallen, there's a voice in you that whispers there's more. I know that voice. I followed it here once, just like you." The room fell into a profound silence. Every ear was tuned to him. He continued, "When I first came here, I thought I was broken. I wanted someone to fix me, to tell me what to do. But what I learned is that no one can change your life for you. Growth doesn't come from outside, it comes from the inside. The moment you take responsibility for everything in your life, you take back your power." He walked slowly around the circle, meeting each gaze. "Samuel taught me that success isn't something you chase. It's something you attract by becoming the person who deserves it. And that journey, the one within, is the hardest road you'll ever walk. But it's also the most rewarding." He paused, his eyes softening. "You will fail. You will doubt. You will want to quit. But every time you choose to keep going, you build something no one can take from you, character. And once you have that, everything else falls into place." For the first time, Alex understood what it meant to be a teacher, not someone who gives answers, but someone who helps others find their own. He pulled from his pocket the 2 wooden keys and held them up for everyone to see. "These," he said, "were given to me as reminders. The first key is for yourself, to unlock the doors within you that fear has kept shut. The second key is for others, to open hearts, to guide, to lift. You can't use the second until you've turned the first." A murmur of emotion swept through the room. Some people nodded. Others had tears in their eyes. The young woman who greeted him whispered, "Will you lead us?" Alex looked down at the keys one last time, and then at the people before him, the new seekers, the new dreamers, the new students of life. "No," he said softly. "We'll lead together. Growth isn't a ladder. It's a circle." He placed the keys on the center table, beside a small candle that flickered gently. As the flame reflected off their smooth wooden surface, Alex felt an overwhelming calm settle over him. This was what Samuel meant, not just to grow, but to give back, to pass the light forward. As the session began, Alex guided them through the same exercises Samuel had once taught him: awareness, discipline, reflection. But his words carried something different now, the weight of experience. When he spoke about fear, his voice trembled with truth. When he spoke about silence, his eyes held peace. And when he spoke about change, it was with the authority of someone who had walked through the fire and come out transformed. Outside, the city moved as it always had, people rushing, cars honking, screens glowing. But inside that quiet room, time seemed to slow. There was no noise, no distraction. Only the steady rhythm of breath, the whisper of growth, the awakening of self. Hours passed, and when the session ended, Alex remained seated as everyone left one by one. The last person turned back and said, "Thank you. I feel like I just met myself for the first time." Alex smiled, the same way Samuel once had. "That's the beginning," he said. When the room was finally empty, he sat alone in the flickering light. He thought of the journey, the foggy mornings, the park bench, the cabin, Daniel's wisdom, the letters, the silence, and the courage it took to keep walking when the path was unclear. He realized now that life had never been about reaching a destination. It had always been about becoming worthy of the road itself. He rose and looked out the window at the city beyond. The reflection staring back at him wasn't the tired, defeated man he once knew. It was someone new, someone awake, aware, alive. He whispered to his reflection, "You did it." Then, after a moment, he corrected himself softly, "You're doing it." Because self-work never truly ends. It evolves. It deepens. It becomes a way of life. He turned off the lights, leaving only the small candle burning beside the keys. As he walked out into the night, the wind carried the faint echo of Samuel's voice. "Work harder on yourself than you do on your job." And for the first time, Alex didn't just understand those words. He embodied them. He walked into the world not as a seeker, but as a builder, of minds, of purpose, of change. The next morning, the sun rose over the river, golden and full, washing the city in light. Somewhere, perhaps watching from afar, Samuel smiled. The circle had completed itself, only to begin again, with new faces, new stories, new awakenings. Because in the end, life's greatest lesson is simple yet profound. When you dare to work on yourself, you don't just change your life, you change the world around you. Like this video and subscribe to my channel for more powerful and life-changing stories like this.